Welcome everyone to the week 5 recording where we're covering the teaching of reading. And these are your learning intentions and success criteria. We're going to look at what are the core teaching practices, the skills to focus on, and other considerations for planning. So I'm going to take you straight to the gradual release of responsibility. This is the foundation for effective instruction. And so when we go from high level of support, we start with a very teacher-centered approach, and then we move students eventually towards independence where there's minimal support. And so you'll see that those core teaching practices, modelled, shared, guided, and independent, are mapped onto that gradual release of responsibility model. And so modelled reading is the highest level of support, and it's where the teacher provides a model for what a good reader does. They model certain strategies or skills that the students need to learn. The students observe and listen while the teacher models that and thinks out loud. Shared reading is where the students and the teacher work together. There's still a lot of teacher support, but the students are invited to contribute to the reading. They might read along with you. There's still a lot of teacher scaffolding through questioning and prompts and feedback. And usually this is a whole group. It can be done with a small group, and usually there's one shared enlarged text. Same with the modelled reading. Guided reading is a small group practice. This is where the teacher has less input. The teacher is just there on the side to provide prompts, guidance, and checking for understanding. The students work together to read independently, and the teacher will also sometimes check in to see how they're going with their, if there's any unknown words, etc. It's a very complex practice, and it's often misunderstood as being higher on the gradual release of responsibility. We often hear teachers say, I'm going to do guided reading, but it's sometimes misunderstood or confused with shared reading. So again, this is for students that are already decoding and are building their comprehension and fluency. So then independent. So independent reading again is they're not fully support. There's no high level of support there. We're expecting students to practice what they've learned in the modelled reading session, and the teacher will assess students at this point throughout the literacy block. So they might take a running record, or they might listen to the students read and or do a fluency test, etc., so that they can use that to inform their teaching. The other practices that are listed there that I haven't mapped onto here are really important as well. Language experience is excellent for ESL, as well as students that have very low experience with language, because it provides them with a sort of like a little incursion, excursion, or a little contextualized game or activity. Then the students will then reflect on that, recount it, and talk about it. And the teacher writes down what the student says, so they see that language can be written down, and then they read it together. So they're building a shared experience about language. Interactive reading aloud is about reading. It's a whole group, modelled and shared. It sort of fits in between. Whole group practice where the teacher chooses a text that's rich in vocabulary and concepts, building it over time. So they might read it, the same text every day for 3 days, and each time focus in on a newer aspect. And the students, it's excellent for building vocabulary knowledge, for building comprehension. And guided reading reciprocal teaching is where the students actually are taking on roles. It's kind of a point before literature circles. So there's still a lot of scaffolding beforehand to get them to understand the roles and then to work as a team to understand and appreciate and enjoy a text, a shared text. So again, this is not for students that are learning to decode. This is for students that are already starting to build comprehension and fluency. And then literature circles is where students choose a text they want to read, and they take on roles such as questioner, summariser, etc. Those roles will have been taught previously, and then they have a go at taking on those roles as they read the text together. So this gradual release of responsibility model is the foundation for effective teaching. It doesn't just apply to reading, it applies to all instruction. We need to see, we need to have support, we need to observe a skilled other engaging in a task so that we can actually then learn that task and learn that skill. And a useful structure for the literacy block is the whole small whole structure. You might have seen this while being on placement, and it starts with the whole group, with the teacher modelling or sharing or using interactive reading practice with a focus on a particular aspect of the reading process. So that might be fluency, it might be rereading to check if understanding has been lost. It might be that students are learning about a particular sound of phonics and learning in context, of phonics context. They might be learning about punctuation, reading with expression. There's lots of different things you can focus on. And I mean, the very first thing, if you're teaching students that are new to reading, is that reading is to be enjoyed. That's the important thing we need to always model, either explicitly or implicitly. And then we move into small groups, and this is where the teacher has one group with them, and they might model, share, or use a guided reading approach. And then other groups are working, or they might be working individually, but they might work in groups, but they're independent of you. They're engaged in a task that helps them practice what was modelled in that whole group session. And they have to be given a task they will be able to achieve on their own. And this is tricky. So in the very early years, it takes a while for that to become an effective routine. So don't expect it to happen straight away. They need to remember not to interrupt you when you're doing your small group with guided teacher-led group. Great if you've got a parent helper or a teacher aide, but don't count on it. It's not a given. Okay, and then back as a whole group. So we get back together and we reflect on the learning intentions and the success criteria, celebrate learning, reinforce strategies, but would never use that last part to introduce something new. That's really cognitive overload for students. Now, there's some points about this that we need to consider here. It does mean that you need eyes in the back of your head. So when you're working with that small group, you do need to have strategies in place to manage the classroom. And another point I touched on a minute ago was that teacher aides might be there, but it's not a given that you'll have one. They should also never be expected to teach children. They're paraprofessionals. It's the teacher's job to teach, not a teacher aide. So given the focus on phonics in Victoria, the literacy block and the teaching of reading needs to be informed by the Big Six, one of the most influential models, meta studies that you need to understand. And we know that these 6 components contribute to effective reading through that huge analysis, that research analysis. So what does that look like in the classroom? So more and more schools are beginning to start their literacy block with this explicit systematic synthetic phonics, or SSP. And as you might already be aware, there are Victorian lesson plans available via the ARC site, ARC site, to support teachers in this. So in alignment with this, the typical literacy block in the early years of primary school would be structured to have that SSP as the core component, and as it's been recommended, a minimum of 25 minutes of daily explicit phonics instruction. So that first chunk would be teaching letter sound relationships, starting with the really simple ones to the more complex ones. It might be incorporating some decodable readers as a tool, not the sole reading material, followed by modelled reading. So the teacher reads, demonstrates a skill, fluency, expression, comprehension, etc. And then it could be that, or it could be interactive reading. So getting students engaging in discussion, making predictions, inferring meaning, etc., while the teacher sort of scaffolds that. It could be shared reading, reading a large book with the students joining in. And then the next chunk would be guided reading or small group instructions. So this is where we differentiate for students' individual needs. They read texts at their right level. They have strong teacher support, or they might be developing independence. They focus on decoding, inferencing, those kinds of things. And then the next chunk is word work and vocab development. So this is about word structures and meanings, getting students to think about the text they've just listened to. What were some of those interesting words? It might be some instruction on prefixes, suffixes, root words. And then vocab games, to reinforce those new words. And then the last chunk is the writing instruction. So this is where students would be engaging in any of the following. And that's something we will cover in the next few weeks in this unit. Okay, so what I wanted you to do is to have a look at the lesson plan, the Victorian lesson plan, in the Week 5 Tute folder. And of course you can't discuss with a partner, but this is where you post on the forum. What do you think the strengths of the lesson plan are, the weaknesses? How engaging do you think the lesson would be? In what ways does it align with best practices for early reading instruction? Think about the gradual release, think about cognitive overload, think about all the things that you've learned so far about the teaching of reading. And how does it cater for diverse learners? How does it differentiate? And what changes would you make to the lesson plan? So that's your homework. Okay, so I want you to click on there and view this video on shared reading. And when you've finished, I want you to consider why would it be important not to stop and discuss the text during the first read aloud? Why do you think they did that? What else? What did you see the teachers model for the students? And do you think this catered for a range of needs? Now we're going to have a look at the core teaching practice of guided reading. And the next few videos are sort of breaking it down into its chunks and what we do first, and then to build them up to independent. So watch this video, click on the link there to see how we orient students before we get into the session, and consider how an orientation might help students reading. The next step is the preparation, and this is where the teacher does a whole lot of front loading and building up background knowledge. So I want you to look at this video and consider how it supports the readers. And the next part is the strategy check. And so after this video, I want you to then consider how what is the whole purpose of guided reading? What is the teacher really trying to do, and how does it connect to the gradual release of responsibility? So that the final section would be, the final part would be obviously having the students then read the book independently while the teacher checks in and assesses their how their progress, and also checks whether their teaching was successful. So while the teachers in those previous videos used leveled texts, there's been a move to use decodable text in line with the new focus on phonics. So decodable texts that contain a high percentage of words made up of learnt grapheme phoneme patterns are the ones that are used. Decodable texts are supporting beginning readers to practice their phonics skills. So they're best used when students are first learning to read, and they're most effective when they're used right after a phonics lesson. And they help students practice their phonics skills and apply their knowledge of letter sounds to words. Whereas a level text doesn't have the same purpose as a decodable text. They're not meant to practice a specific phonics skill. They're not just isolated on phonics. A level text is useful to practice generalizing phonics skills that you've already taught, high frequency words that have been introduced, and specific vocabulary. And they can also assist in building fluency, vocab and comprehension, and should be used in small group shared reading sessions or guided reading sessions. Authentic texts are those that are written purely for a purpose, a genre, to entertain, narrate, instruct, explain, persuade, for example. And they should be read to children and with children every day and from birth. And they're fundamental to building children's knowledge of concepts, culture, language. And so they have this, they're real, they have natural language to entertain, to inform, etc. So back to decodable books. These are designed to align with stages of beginning readers. Now we know that through research, stages of beginning readers is not a very rich, there's not a lot of research because we're all different and there's no set trajectory for students' development of reading. However, these decodable books are based on those teaching of the sequenced teaching of phonics. So they have those simplified spelling patterns to ensure that students can focus on practicing those specific letter sound correspondences that they've learned, building confidence and hopefully reducing frustration. The patterns are supposed to enable independent reading success, which is critical in the early stages of literacy development. And the key principle of decodable books is that they closely align with explicit phonics instruction. That means that every word in the decodable book is based on the phonics patterns that the students have just been taught. So they follow a series, like I said, or a sequenced progression. Initially, they'll introduce simple sound spelling correspondences and they gradually incorporate more complex combinations. And so that's a systematic approach that's aimed to scaffold learning. And they, I guess, are aimed at supporting mastery through systematic instruction. So these are the features of a decodable book. They're very controlled. They start with those simple codes, CVC words, and basic structure to extend code. They start with complex vowel systems, so it starts to get more complex, multi-syllabic and multi-morphemic words. Some are high-frequency words, so for example, the and her, because they need them there for story cohesion. So yeah, there's an example of one. And I sort of touched on this earlier. So that look, most phonics programs have got their own developed scope and sequence for the introduction of those grapheme phoneme correspondences. And there's still no there's no agreed upon phonics scope and sequence. Okay, there's still not enough research to say that this letter needs to be taught first, etc. And that's probably because, again, we're all different and we need to differentiate. But I guess there are still those core principles to consider is that that teacher knowledge and judgment built from assessment of students' needs is critical in determining the starting point and the pace for their students. So I just wanted to end with a nice piece of research on student reading and learning to read. The first point is actually quite robust and conclusive, that students read more, understand more, and are more likely to continue reading when they've got the opportunity to choose what they read, because it boosts their motivation, gives them agency, makes them more likely that they will enjoy what they've read. Good readers read accurately almost all of the time. So the last 60 years of research on text difficulty consistently demonstrates the importance of having students read text they can accurately read and understand. So anything that's too difficult slows that reading down, slows the rate of improvement in reading skills, and it doesn't improve reading ability at all. So when they read accurately, they solidify their word recognition, decoding, and more importantly, they're more likely to understand what they read and enjoy it. Okay, because that's the goal, isn't it? To understand reading. When students can write about something they care about, they use the conventions of spelling and grammar because it matters to them that their ideas are communicated, not because they'll lose points or see the red pen all over it. They have to think about the words that will best convey their ideas to their readers. So this is the beautiful connection between reading and writing. Because they have to encode those words that they're using, they make sure that they're hopefully getting their message across. They use punctuation in a way that the reader will understand. So when it's personally meaningful, it's going to improve and encourage the student. Every child talks with peers about reading and writing. So this is another one of our research that shows that conversation that you saw with those guided reading sessions that would also occur during shared reading or interactive reading improves comprehension, and it improves engagement with texts, because it's not just focusing on retelling or recalling what students have read. It's about thinking about what they've read, analysing it, commenting, connecting. And so research shows that there's better outcomes when kids just talk about what they've read with a peer than if they sit on their own and highlight stuff in the text, for example. So setting aside time for students to talk about their reading and writing is one of the most underused yet easy to do elements of instruction. Every child needs to listen to an adult fluently reading because it increases their own fluency and comprehension skills. This is also research. It also expands their vocabulary, their background knowledge, their sense of story structure, their awareness of genre, and the comprehension, of course, which is the goal. And yet research shows that teachers that anything above year one, there's fewer and fewer teachers are reading aloud to children. Yet it's a really high impact strategy, an underused component of the kind of instruction that supports readers. So it needs to happen every day. Reading to your students every day. Okay, so can you name some of those core teaching practices for reading? Can you think of some of the skills that might be focused on when we're teaching reading? And what sort of things do we need to consider when we're planning to teach reading?